Good morning again. Friday and yesterday, the men of this congregation and some of our men of this area were part of what was a great blessing. It was our third Treasure Valley Men's Rally. That's just a name that we gave our men's retreat when we just stay here at the building instead of going out of town. And this is our third time in every other year that we've done that. We had 50 men that were here in a combination of Friday and Saturday. We had two sessions Friday night, two yesterday, and then a time of prayer together, and then shared in a meal together. When this comes around again next year, Lord willing, next year we'll be going out of town, then we'll come back again the following year back here. But when this comes on the calendar, make plans, men. Make plans to attend this. This is such a good shot in the arm for us as men. It's a good shot in the arm for all of us. But please make plans to be a part of this when it comes around again next year. If you'd like to see or listen to the lessons that you missed Friday and Saturday, you can pull up our YouTube channel. You can get on the website and see those lessons. You can find them on Facebook. Watch those lessons. Listen to those lessons and share them. Share them with your friends. Put them on your Facebook page. Share them through YouTube to your social media. Let people see these messages that we were able to hear. Our speaker for the weekend and our speaker again this morning is Brother Steve Higginbotham. Steve is with us. He's a native of West Virginia, but currently he preaches with the Carnes congregation, the Carnes Church of Christ in Knoxville, Tennessee. Steve is a very accomplished man, has done a great deal of work for the kingdom. He is part of the adjunct faculty at the East Tennessee School of Preaching. He's written curriculum for 21st Century Christian, for Gospel Advocate, has written several articles in other Brotherhood publications. He is the founder of the website called preachinghelp.org. And if you get on that website, you can also find a link to his, as he says, sort of weekly blog that he sends out called Mercy Mail. It's MERC capital E mail. It's a Mercy email. So that's kind of the play on it there. Mercy email. And that's again, it's just a short devotional thought that you can receive in your email. Steve has preached over 170 gospel meetings, has done mission work. He has preached in lectureships in 19 states. I don't know if that's 19 or now we're 20, but either several states. But as most men, most husbands, I'd imagine Steve's the proudest achievement of his life is his wife, Kim, who has lent him to us for this weekend. He and Kim met at Freed Hardman and together have 4 children, Kelly, Michael, Matthew, and Anne Marie. You're about to be blessed. If you were in our Bible class this morning, Steve shared with us some great ideas about Bible study. This morning, he's going to preach to us about looking through the eyes of Jesus. Brother Steve.
It is good to be here. I really appreciate the invitation, and I've looked forward to coming for some time now. I've never been to Idaho, and this is my first time, and it's beautiful here. I understand why you live here. It's a great place to be. And you all have been, being able to spend some time with the men Friday and Saturday, I come to help you all, but I'm the one leaving oftentimes helped, and that's the way I have felt here. There have been people, not everyone even knows how to give. Complimenting people there's a fine art to it. A lady went out the door one time, and she said, I had preached on hell, and she came out the door and said, Steve, I want you to know that I didn't know what hell was like until I heard you preach. And I don't know if that was a compliment or an insult, but you all have been very kind to me and encouraged me while I have been here with you. I did want to say this. Whenever I go somewhere for the very first time, I go ahead and answer 2 questions, and that way you don't have to think about it, and maybe it will help you to listen some more. And so here are my answers to the 2 questions. I'm 6'6", and yes, I played basketball. Can we be done with that? Since I've been here, people have said, how tall are you? And And, you just cleared that door frame, when you walked in and all those kind of things. And a little boy was telling me, wow, you're taller than my mommy, and all those kind of things. But I'll tell you, I've lived with being tall all my life. People will come up to me, and they'll get right next to me and kind of size me up and then poke me in the ribs and say, how's the weather up there? And they'll slap their leg like that's the funniest thing. And new to me. I've never heard that one, So years ago, I decided I'm going to work on a comeback to all this stuff. And so I was on a lectureship in West Virginia. And when I got done, I didn't even get out of the pulpit. I stepped off to the side, and this guy comes up and just bumps into me, looks up at me and says, how tall are you anyway? Just hateful sounding. And I said, I'm 6'6", and he said, I bet you played basketball. And I said, yes, I did. And with that, he just turned and started to walk off the pulpit. And I said, well, wait a second, how tall are you? And he said, I'm 5'4". And I said, I bet you played miniature golf. Well, he didn't do what you just did. So I'm just telling you, I'm ready for you. If you want to go there, we can go there. I had a lady go out, an older lady one time, and she said, young man, how tall are you? And I said, I'm 5'18". And she shook her head and said, I could have sworn you were over 6 feet. Oh, well. I'll tell you one more. I was in Walmart. You've seen like the people of Walmart websites sometimes. And I was at Walmart one time, and there was an older lady behind me, and I just kind of caught out of the corner of my eye. She had her phone out, and she's taking my picture. And so I turned around, and she said, oh, I'm sorry. I believe you're the biggest man in the world. And I wanted to take, so you may find me on People of Walmart. Anyway, it's good to be here. And here's what I want to do this morning. I want to talk to you about seeing through the eyes of Jesus. You all, myself included, need to see and develop the perspective that Jesus had, to be able to see through his eyes and see as he would see. My wife is very different from me in terms of perception. She sees things in ways that I don't see it. We went to a movie one time, sat down, just got seated, and sometimes they scroll credits, at the beginning. And as they're scrolling these credits, there's this little scene going on behind it. In the back, she started crying. I mean, we hadn't even started in the movie. We're in the credits, and she starts crying. And I'm like, I don't get it, but she's a whole lot more sensitive. A few years later, I took my youngest daughter on a daddy-daughter date, and we went to the movie. We went to see Up. You know what I'm talking about? And when that first came out. And we were having a big time, and then that movie started. And that first, 5 minutes, I'm ready to explode in crying. And it took every bit of strength I had not to just lose it. And so I go home, and I tell my wife, you got to go see this movie. And she said, it's a cartoon. I said, it'll get you. And she said, a cartoon-ish kind of a movie is not going to bother me. So I took her. Oh, it was awful. She was really upset for a while, and she won't watch it when it comes on TV. But my point is, she sees things differently than I do. And I'm just saying this, if we would see like Jesus sees, we would view life differently. Things that sometimes we laugh at, we wouldn't laugh at if we had the perspective of Jesus. And things that, don't faze us at all would break our hearts if we could see through the eyes of Jesus. And so I want to give an example of that today from the book of Luke. If you have your Bible, go ahead and open it to Luke chapter 7. And I want you to see an occasion in the life of Jesus that where he saw what no one else saw. And I want us to be able to develop that. Our neighbors, our friends need us to see like Jesus sees. In Luke chapter 7, there is a Pharisee who asked Jesus to dinner. And the Pharisees were the separatists. They were very proud of their knowledge of God's Word and sticklers for the law. And so this man recognizes Jesus as a great teacher. People are mobbing to him. He's been doing some things that he doesn't quite understand, miracles. And so he says, come to my house. And Jesus said, I will. This is a big day for this Pharisee. Jesus, the man that multitudes have been mobbing and following, he's coming to my house. Verse 36. Then one of the Pharisees asked him to eat with him, and he went to the Pharisee's house and sat down to eat. Now, when I was growing up, my dad preached for 60 years. My mom was an immaculate housekeeper, and it was just, that was the way we lived. And when we had a house that was to accommodate, there was like a preacher's bedroom upstairs. We had so many bedrooms, and we just referred to it as kids. And in our family, there was the preacher's room upstairs, and that's where the preachers would stay. But whenever the preacher would come for a gospel meeting or whatever, a seminar, they would stay there. But my mom, who was clean already, our house was so clean, she would extra clean because the preacher's coming. We would pull the refrigerator out, and she would clean behind the refrigerator. And I would say, Mom, we've kept preachers forever, and I've never seen any one of them pull it out and look back there behind there to see what it looks like. But that's the kind of thing it was. She just, the preacher's coming, it's going to be perfect. And I suspect that this Pharisee was concerned about all those details. Jesus is coming to my house to eat. And most people can't even get close to him because there's a mob of people, but he's coming to my house. I'm sure the servants were cleaning and all this thing. It was just put together so they would have the perfect meal together. This is an important man coming to his house. Look at what it says in the next verse. And behold, a woman in the city who was a sinner, when she knew that Jesus sat at the table in the Pharisee's house, she brought an alabaster flask of fragrant oil and stood at his feet behind him, weeping. And she began to wash his feet with her tears and wiped them with the hair of her head. And she kissed his feet and anointed them with fragrant oil. Okay, so he's having Jesus over. Jesus gets there. They're sat down ready to eat, or getting ready to eat. And this woman, a sinful woman, heard that Jesus was in this house. She got this fragrant perfume and just burst in their house, uninvited, and falls down at Jesus' feet and breaks open that and pours that perfume all over Jesus. And she's crying, and she's laid out behind him. And here's Jesus, if you would, standing, and this woman is behind him, and she's wrapped around his feet and legs, and she's taking her hair and wiping his feet with her hair, and the tears were dripping on his feet, and she's cleaning his feet, and she's made the whole place smell. Have you ever been around? I know sometimes perfume smells good, but sometimes, have you ever sat by someone in church where that good smelling perfume was just a little bit too much? You know, there's just a strong smell. Well, I'm sure she just kind of smelled up the house with, probably smelled good, but it probably was a lot and strong smell. And all this is going on. Now, don't look at this through 21st century eyes. Put yourself back. What if this were to happen to you today? What if you had someone really important come into your house, and it's an important person, a famous person, and you've got everything just so, and a sinful person comes in the side door, uninvited, throws herself down at this person's feet and begins to cry and wiping his feet, I guarantee you we would be like 911. You know, we would be calling somebody to, who is this? What in the world is going on? Who does she think she is? This woman breaks in, uninvited, unannounced, and throws herself at the feet of Jesus and makes a huge scene. Look at the next verse. Now when the Pharisee who had invited him saw this, he spoke to himself, saying, this man, if he were a prophet, would know who and what manner of woman this is who's touching him, for she's a sinner. It's twice now we've been told this is a sinful woman. This Pharisee sees this happening and this woman wrapped around the legs of Jesus, and he's going to himself, wait a second now. I kind of thought that Jesus might have been a prophet, but if he were a prophet, he would know what kind of woman this is, and there's no respectable man that would let a woman just grab a hold of him like that. I don't know, this isn't adding up for me. I like what the next verse says. And Jesus, verse 40, and Jesus answered and said to him. He answered what? No one had said anything to him. What Simon said, he said in his mind. Jesus knows the minds of men, though, doesn't he? He's thinking all this about Jesus, and so the text says Jesus answered him, though he wasn't even saying anything, and said, Simon, I have something to ask you or say to you. So he said, teacher, say it. He said, well, there was a certain creditor who had two debtors. One owed 500 denarii and the other 50. And when they had nothing with which to repay, he freely forgave them both. Tell me, therefore, which of them will love him more? Now, I know we're not familiar with the currency, denarii, that kind of thing, so let's just talk in terms of dollars. Jesus said, I want to ask you a question. There are two guys that owe another guy money. One owes $500 and the other owes 50. The man forgives both of them their debts. Say, don't worry about it. You don't need to pay me. We're good. Who will love that man the most? Well, Simon answers and said, I suppose the one whom he forgave more. And he said to him, you have rightly judged. Makes sense. The guy that was forgiven more would seem to practical, obvious that he would love more. Then Jesus turned to the woman and said to Simon, and this is the key for the lesson, and this is something, again, if you don't slow down and think, you might pass over this, but I think it's a powerful statement. Jesus now turns to the woman. Remember, the woman is behind him? And he's been talking to Simon. And so Jesus turns to the woman, which meant he would have turned his back to Simon. And he faces the woman and he says, Simon, do you see this woman? What kind of a question is that? Do you see this woman? Well, of course I see this woman. She broke in my house uninvited. She's made a scene. She smelled the whole place up. And you're asking me, do I see this woman? What kind of a question is that? Well, I believe Jesus asked that question because what Simon saw is not what Jesus saw. And we'll see that in just a moment. But Simon is asked the question, do you see this woman? I entered your house. You gave me no water for my feet, but she has washed my feet with her tears and wiped them with the hair of her head. You gave me no kiss, but this woman has not ceased to kiss my feet since the time I came in. You did not anoint my head with oil, but this woman has anointed my feet with fragrant oil. Therefore I say to you, her sins, which are many, are forgiven, for she loved much. But to whom little is forgiven, the same loves little. I'm sure Simon's putting two and two together here. He's just made a point. about me. Then he said to her, your sins are forgiven. And those who sat at the table with him began to say to themselves, who is this who even forgives sins? Then he said to the woman, your faith has saved you. Go in peace. What I want to do at this point is go back and look at that statement. Why would Jesus ask Simon, do you see this woman? When it was obvious that he did. Everybody did. Well, I think it's because they didn't see her in the same way. Simon saw a sinner, right? Twice he emphasizes she was a sinful woman. He probably had seen her somewhere in town where she would place herself in a position where maybe she could attract men or find men, and he recognized her. This woman doesn't have a good reputation at all. That's all Simon saw, a sinful woman. Simon saw a woman that probably could not go to the well to gather water in the morning, in the cool of the day, when all the respectable women went, because she would not have been welcome. You see, the wives of the men in town probably would have seen her as a threat to their marriage. She would not have been welcome with them, so she probably had to go do her daily, getting the water for the day. Probably had to do it by herself in the heat of the day, or maybe with other women who were like her. That's what Simon saw. Simon saw a woman who just was not respected in the community. A woman who had an embarrassing lifestyle, an embarrassing past. A woman who had a reputation because he knew she was a sinner. A woman who was probably a loner, because those who had any kind of reputation about them or any sense of being a good person, they wouldn't want her with them. So that's what Simon saw. But Jesus is going to teach that you've missed something in this woman. She's more than what you've sized her up to be. And I'm asking you, do you see her? Because you don't see what I see. It's apparent. Let me illustrate. Jesus saw somebody different than Simon saw. And if I can illustrate it this way, when I was in college, my grandmother developed Alzheimer's to the point where she couldn't stay by herself anymore, and she came to live with us. And it was sad. I went off to college and I came home, and when I came home, I remember that one break where she didn't know who I was anymore. And it was disturbing to me. It was a sad day because my own grandmother didn't know who I was. And it wasn't through any fault of her own. She couldn't help that, but it didn't mean that it didn't hurt. And she would sit in this corner chair in our living room and just stare straight all day long. If she talked about things that happened 70 years earlier, and just repetitious over and over again, just saying things. Sometimes she would just count over and over to 100 and just do that. And if my friends had come over when I was home on break, and if I were to say, do you see that woman sitting over there? Yeah? What do you see? Their answer would be something like, I see an old lady who doesn't have anything going on in her mind. I see an old lady who's just sitting, waiting to die. And that's probably about all that they could see. And that would be right as far as it went. But I could look at that lady and I saw so much more. I could see my grandmother as a little girl being held by my great-grandmother in her arms for the first time. I could imagine the joy on my great-grandmother's face. I can imagine my grandmother as a little 6-year-old girl skipping down the road in a long dress, going to a one-room schoolhouse somewhere in West Virginia. I could picture that. I could see my grandmother as a young lady falling in love with my granddad, and the excitement and all of that that takes place when you find the one you want to spend the rest of your life with. I could see my grandmother holding my mom in her arms and being so proud to have the only daughter that she had. When I think of my grandmother, or when I would see her in the corner of the house, you know what I would see? I would see a little glass cookie jar with a green lid about that big. You take that, as a little boy, my hands just fit where I could turn that, and there were always homemade sugar cookies inside. My sister has that cookie jar. Somehow I got to get that from her. But I could see that. When we would visit it at Christmas time, we would go down into the basement of the house, and they didn't have, central air and heat and so forth, and they had these little gas stoves on around the house, and that gas stove in the basement, and it was in the wintertime, and it was cold, and there was a bed for my sister and myself to sleep in, but Grandma had made, a gazillion quilts in her life, and she would just pile quilt after quilt after quilt on you, so you weren't cold. You couldn't roll over because of the weight, but you weren't cold. I could see all that. My friends couldn't. All they could see is a dying woman. But I saw so much more. And if you can understand that, then you can understand what's going on with Jesus and Simon. Because when Simon looks at this woman, all he sees is this sinful, shameful outcast who has broken into my house and disrupted my get-together. Jesus saw something completely different. Jesus saw a woman who probably was tired of walking to the well all by herself in the heat of day. She was probably tired of respectable women looking at her with disgust and contempt. She's probably tired of being an outcast, just wanting to be accepted and to be treated like she had some worth and some value. She was probably tired, what Jesus could see, a woman who was tired of men who would come and visit her at night, who wouldn't give her the time of day in the daylight, who would pass her on the street and never speak, but knock on her door after dark. She's probably tired of not being respected like she should have been respected. Jesus must have seen a woman who he knew was so desperate for something better that she would throw protocol and etiquette to the wind and just break into someone's house uninvited and throw herself on the floor. And if you don't, again, don't just read this story, put it in today's terms. How desperate would you have to be for when you leave here today to just drive to some random house on your way home and break in their side door and fall down on the floor and start crying at the owner of the house? I mean, how desperate, what would it take to get you to do that? It'd take a lot. You would never do that or volunteer that. That's what this woman has in essence done. She has gone to a house, she wasn't invited, she knows what's going on, and she just breaks in. She is so desperate to get out of where she is. Her only hope is Jesus. And Jesus can see her desperation. Simon didn't. He just said, wow, a sinful woman has just ruined my party. And Jesus is looking at this woman saying, wow, This woman is desperate for a life that is better than what she has. That's what I want us to learn to do. Folks, there can be people sitting here who are on the outside. And man, they long to be accepted. Have you met people, have you known people that are always like the fifth wheel? They just have no social awareness. They're difficult. The more they try to fit in, the worse they make it for themselves. I've talked to people like that. I've had a lady say to me in my office one time, I know I'm odd and I know that people don't want to be around me. And when I try to like find my way in, I just make it worse. I say something and it just makes it worse. And I'm tired of being on the outside. And I don't know how to fix that. See, the thing that bothers me the most about that is that we kind of think, well, those strange people like that, they're not aware that they're strange. Yes, she was. And she needed affirmation in her life. But the Christians around her were like, oh no, don't look that way, here she comes. Okay, shoo, she walked on by. That was close. I thought she was going to come and join our conversation. Have you ever done that? Wait, don't answer the phone. Don't answer the phone. That's so-and-so. She'll keep me for 20 minutes. I know she will. I don't want to talk to her. Have you ever done that? You see, there are people that it's real easy to see what's on the surface. Yeah, they're an interruption. They're a drain. It's tedious. But do you suppose Jesus sees more in them than what we're seeing? Do you suppose when he looks at those people, he sees deeper than what we're seeing? I think he probably does. I want us as God's people to be able to reflect the image of Jesus more perfectly. And to do that, I've got to see through his eyes. I've got to learn to see people not as interruptions to my schedule, not as drains on my time and my emotional well-being. I need to see them as people created in the image of God who are eternity bound, who need help. That's how Jesus sees people. And that's how I want you to see people. I want you to see your neighbor as that person that God loves and wants to go to heaven, and not as the guy who, doesn't mow that strip between your house and his house and makes you have to take an extra strip. I want you to see people as Jesus sees people. And if you do, you will be more Christ-like than you ever have been before. And that will translate into people coming to know Jesus and having a hope of heaven, who otherwise would have drowned in their desperation and in their lostness. Let's be the hands, the feet, the eyes of Jesus while we're here on earth. He's gone, but he's left a church behind to do his business. And we need to continue that business, that agenda of Jesus, and we can't do it unless we see like him. If you're here this morning and you're not yet a child of God, I hope you obey the gospel. Jesus said, "He that believes and is baptized shall be saved." I trust him, and I believe he'll absolutely do that. If you haven't done that today, or yet as of today, I hope you'll do that this morning. If you're a child of God already but unfaithful, and maybe you haven't been the disciple you need to be, and you want to draw a line in the sand and say, I want to do better. I want to be a better learner, a follower of Jesus. And will you pray with me to that end? We'll be happy to pray with you if you'll come as we stand.